Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cop to Corporate. I'm Sam, your podcast host. We are going to unpack one of the most challenging career pivots out there, moving from the structured, high stakes world of law enforcement into the fast moving, strategy driven world of business. Today, we are featuring a team that has not only made that transition, but turned it into a blueprint for success. So, we are joined by the leadership of Samson Shield, Quinton Johnstone, David Perry and Gary Ellis, three former law enforcement professionals who transformed decades of policing, crisis response, community protection, and operational leadership into a high performing corporate security organization. Today, we're going to explore how they navigated the identity shift from the badge to the boardroom, how they leveraged their frontline experience to build a respected corporate brand, and what it really takes to translate cop skills into corporate excellence. So please welcome Quinton, David, and Gary to Cop to Corporate.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Welcome. Glad you guys are here. So let's just get right into this. Quinton, we'll start with you. Can you walk us through your path into law enforcement? Like, what drew you into policing? What were some defining moments in your career, and when did you realize that it was? Well, we'll get to that eventually. Tell us about your policing career.
Well, thanks. And again, thank you very much to Cop to Corporate. I think this when I reached out to you folks, been doing a lot of research on you. What a phenomenal format for police officers to be able to transition and learn through others. Your content is very rich and very content rich, and it's very topical. So, um, secondly, I'd like to say thank you to all the service members right across North America and EMS workers. You're the tip of the spear, as it were. If it wasn't for you, society wouldn't exist as it does. So where it all started for me is I'm probably the most unlikely candidate to be a police officer. I was on the first name basis with my local police officers. Used to bring me home when I was not so good. And I kind of fell into it. My friend went down to police headquarters back in '77 and applied to be a police officer. And I was there with, ripped jeans, long hair down to my shoulders. And the recruiter talked me into policing. And I'm glad he did because it was a game changer for me. 30-year career, working under the mentorship of two of my mentors, much older than me, of course, Gary Ellis and Dave Dave Perry, um, but leaders in the industry. And actually, these two, I'm sitting here on a stage with two absolute legends in the industry in Canadian policing. So, had I not been in policing, I probably went into some other field, but it wouldn't be quite frankly as rewarding as it has been.
Amazing. I'm going to need to see a picture of you with that long hair.
Yeah, it was very
So do
red,
I.
very, very red hair. So there you go.
Nice. Dave, tell us about your law enforcement career.
Sure. I think I was put on earth to be a police officer, quite frankly. Won't go through the long story, but um, I smothered in my crib as an infant. And I grew up hearing the stories of the heroic actions of a police officer who, in spite of being told to stop CPR by, uh, emergency services, firefighters, ambulance, and eventually a family doctor, he insisted that they continue, and here I am today. So I grew up hearing that story, and so I was that kid that it didn't matter what grade I was in, and even when in high school, maybe it wasn't cool to say you wanted to be a police officer. I was always that guy that said, "This is exactly what I'm going to do." So as soon as I could sign up and join the Toronto Police Service, I did, and it was the best thing I ever did in terms of making a career decision. I had 28 full years with Toronto Police, where I found the path in the investigative field was an exact match to me and my personality and the challenges that I like to have. So I stayed in the investigative field for probably 75 or 80% of my career and retired out of the sexual assault squad where I was working with Gary Ellis, who was our unit commander, and we were doing, basically stranger on stranger attacks and going after the serial predators and child murderers, child abductors, all that kind of stuff. So we did some very difficult work. And then I suppose later we'll talk about how we then transitioned that into where we are today in our corporate lives.
Yeah, it's amazing that you found your purpose in law enforcement. There's not really many better feelings than feeling that alignment with what you're doing and knowing that you are meant for it. So that's beautiful to hear. So
For
last but
sure,
not
Sam.
least, yeah, Gary, tell us about your law enforcement career.
Well, my first introduction was I grew up in a fairly rough public housing project in Toronto. So there was a lot of interaction with the police in my home and around the neighborhood. And one thing is there was a lot of negativity towards the police, but I never felt that. When a police officer sitting at my kitchen table dealing with a family issue, whatever it was, I always felt this respect for them that they were trying to help. When I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to get a job working in a hospital emergency room. I was what they used to call an orderly. So when I was working there, I thought, boy, I really want to be a medical doctor. And then for some reason, in the environment I grew up in, I still did very well in school. So the possibility was there. And then something happened. A police officer, Leslie Maitland, was shot and he was brought into the emergency room and he died. And something happened to me that day because the chief showed up, Harold Adamson, the police officers, the humanity, and the caring. And I thought that was where a spark was lit. I was still telling everybody I was going to be a medical doctor, but the spark was lit. And then one of my friends said, "Hey, they're hiring cadets at the Toronto Police. You want to come down with me?" Because I had a car because I was working and he wanted to drive. So I drove down with him and had no intention of applying. And the guy looked at me and said, "Listen, we're hiring 19 cadets before the end of the year. Um, how about you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I've thought about it, but I don't know." And he said, "Get over here." Next thing you know, I'm being measured. My eyes are being tested. Some doctor's telling me to bend over, and the rest is history. And I'll tell you, you talk about fate or where you should have been, because I have no doubt that's exactly where I should have been. And it not only did it change my life, it changed the trajectory of my family path. If you talk about generations of not doing well, and that actually changed the direction of the family path and everything else. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
I gotta tell you guys, my heart's really warm right now because hearing every single one of you have either a pivotal moment or some sort of life event that really, turned you on to being a police officer, like very unique stories. And obviously, we wouldn't be here, the four of us today, if not for all of those things happening. So I'm glad we're all here. I'm glad you guys all had such meaningful careers in law enforcement. So, what was it? We'll go back to you, Quinton, that kind of that ended your career that made you think about, okay, it's time to go? What were those events leading up to it where you knew it's time?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. Um, I watched very carefully other, you know, senior police officers and what I call organizational leaders, and I watched their career paths, and because of that, I picked and choose what I liked from a lot of the people that I saw. My recommendation to others is develop your own style, your own path, but look for those mentors, either direct or indirect mentors, and pick the best of the best. And I look at people like I turned to Gary Ellis because he was very, very big in education. And so I went and joined the University of Toronto for business and law. Also, did a lot of work volunteering, and I highly recommend anyone that is looking for a career path after policing to volunteer and join organizations. You'll get friends and learn from others in these organizations about what it is like, when you leave policing. So I turned 50. It was my first opportunity to retire. I had an amazing 30-year career. I did it all. I mean, working in a detective office, working plain clothes. I worked in the Asian crime unit in the 52 division. I walked the beat with Gary Ellis back in the 70s when it was a pretty rough place downtown. There was no one that lived downtown at the time. And Gary and I walked the beat together. Dave and I worked together in 52 plainclothes. After that long career, I decided I wanted to take those transferable skills that I learned and bring it into the corporate sector. And prior to doing that, I became a real estate broker with Remax, and later a broker of record. And I wanted to learn about real estate. My family was heavily involved in real estate when I was a kid. So that helped me transition a lot. So any recommendation I would give to others that are watching is to do something else other than policing in the business world, along and as educating yourself, but try and do something that's going to transition you. Because if you drop off, a 30-year career and expect to get, either become an entrepreneur or get a great job in the corporate world, the transition is very difficult because corporate world is much different than policing. A lot of people think that you're bringing a lot of expertise from policing, and there's only a few career paths, either education or private investigation. And two classic examples of how to do it properly are Dave Perry in the investigative world and Gary Ellis in the education world, but they're few and far between that meet up to their level, frankly. Myself, I had a lot of expertise in the condominium industry. I became, a subject matter expert on condominiums and emergency management in condos and risk mitigation. And so I decided to transition into that field because that became my expertise. Not that I couldn't become an investigator, obviously not as good as Gary and Dave, but certainly I could work for somebody. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to become a CEO of my own company and um, build my own career path. So when you're going to the retirement dues and you see friends that are still working on the job, and you say, hey, well, what's your plan? And the inevitable answer is, well, if something came along, I might jump on it. But I'm sure that Gary and Dave will echo this. No one is coming knocking at your door saying, "Hey, Quinton Johnson, you're the guy or you're the gal. Come and work for me." You got to go out and you got to work for it. And oftentimes you have to take baby steps by working for someone else and then transition into your own company. So, um, quick recommendations: do social responsibility. Volunteerism, get those contacts. They're going to be gold for you in the future. Educate yourself. And while you're on the job, as long as it doesn't impede your fiduciary duties as police officer, do something else. And you'll be better served when you're ready to make that jump.
I really appreciate you saying all of that because that is pretty much the advice that I give out on this podcast too, is making sure that you are preparing yourself for something after while you are still a police officer, because not many times can you retire from law enforcement or leave law enforcement and suddenly get a director role in the corporate world. Like, it's just, unfortunately, despite all the leadership you bring, despite all the skills that you bring, it doesn't always, like, the credits don't always transfer, unfortunately. But that should not stop you from trying. Just be prepared to go. So yeah, great advice. Thank you. Dave, let's hear from you.
Sure. Yeah, my exit strategy was all about fulfillment. First of all, in my career as a police officer, and then second, in my second career, if you will. So I was very lucky. I did everything I wanted to do in policing. When I left there was nothing that I regretted in terms of I wish I would have stayed longer. I wish I would have worked here or there. Policing is a wonderful, wonderful organization and career, because if you're bored doing what you're doing and you work hard, you just put your name in to go somewhere else. So I worked in multiple squads in human trafficking and plainclothes, undercover drugs, detectives' offices, homicide, sex crimes, always doing very challenging jobs, but they all came with their own difference that would keep you interested. So in preparation for leaving the police, I started teaching at a local university/college, and I was teaching justice studies. And I really, really enjoyed it. Built a relationship with the dean at the time, and the dean started asking me when I was ready. And I said, well, I think I'll be ready in January of 2004. So I retired, went into teaching. Now, here's the thing, Sam. I thought I'd made my plan and this was going to be my next 15 or 20 years. I suppose the good news is that if you keep your eyes open, there are other opportunities. And listen, I know this about police officers. I think the three of us on this call could write a book on life after policing, because I went through it. These two gentlemen have gone through it. But more importantly, in our second careers, we have watched literally hundreds of officers knock on our doors and look for something to do post policing. And they, one of the things I love police officers, but one of the things I find they don't do well is understand what they leave the police services with in terms of their skills and abilities and potential out in the corporate world. So I enjoy mentoring ex-police officers now and bringing them into the corporate world and showing them how this amazing world works and how they can successfully apply all that they learned. So what happened to me next, Sam, was I got pulled away in so many directions in terms of consulting work that I had to have that family chat, because part of the reason I left was to spend a lot more time with my family. And I was so busy teaching and consulting, it was almost like I was back at the Toronto Police Service working on calls and crazy shifts and way too many hours. So I decided to set up this investigative company, and kind of the rest is history. And when we get to that point, I can tell you about that road, which has been a long road, lots of bumps, lots of mistakes made, but certainly a lot of lessons came out of those mistakes, to the point where I never called myself a businessman until probably the last 5 years. So I've been at this 19 years. But it was all a big, big learning curve, and working with amazing retired police officers and figuring out where their skills would best apply within my business. And I'd love to talk more with you about that and how we recognize who has what skills and where they can be best applied out in the corporate world.
Absolutely. And congratulations on your abundance of opportunities after leaving law enforcement. That's really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, Gary, it sounds like you were a very important person to the two others here on this call. So, can you tell us about your transition out of law enforcement and what you turned that into?
Well, you're going to hear they were very important to me. I there's actually three areas. There's the very practical, there's the financial, but the one underlying it all was the emotional. I won't talk too much about it, but I was a runner-up for chief of police, and anyone in law enforcement knows that if you don't get the job, it gets difficult in some ways afterwards. And so that had happened to me, and I had no intention of retiring. But during my career, what I had done is to deal with stress. I'd done some of the things they're talking about. I went to school. I went to school for about 30 years. I got a doctorate from the University of Toronto ultimately, with no goal in mind other than just to keep my mind on something other than the stressful police work we did. I know Dave, just before I left, we were in charge of several child abduction, assaults, murders that were just horrendous. And the stress was incredible. I know for Dave, and it was for me as well. And I felt that, you know what? Here's where the practical comes in. I was turning 50. If I stayed 10 more years on the police force, there's no way I was going to be marketable in the 60s. That's what my thinking was at the time. Financially, my pension, I could commute it at age 50. That's what our organization have, which means I can cash it in and actually have the full amount of money. And I thought, okay, what could I do if I did that? I could get control over my own pension plan. So the three things: number one, emotionally, I I thought, what is my future going to be? And Dave had retired, and I'll have to tell you, I built teams. They've alluded to this, where I had someone once said to me, "You quarterback the best investigative police teams anywhere." I said, "No, I'm not a quarterback. People like Dave and Quinton are the quarterbacks and running backs. I'm a lineman. My job is to get on that line, push everybody out of the way so they can run for the touchdowns. And at the end of the day, I claim the glory." And that's exactly what's happened here. Always surrounding myself with people like Dave and Quinton. Quinton is the consummate planner, administrator. Dave is a consummate investigator, but they also have mixtures of those skills in between. So um, when I saw that my future career wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and in some ways you're put off to the side if you don't get the position, if you're a runner up. I thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to see what I can do outside of policing. I'm going to commute my pension, but I'm not going to touch a penny of it. I'm going to invest it. And that way there's a legacy for my family later. I'm not tied into somebody else's control that if I die, my wife gets a percentage. If she dies, the money's gone. Now, and this has worked out quite well 17 years later, I have full control of my pension. It's growing substantially. And I can leave a legacy to my family. In the meantime, I earn an income. As I was leaving, though, I didn't have a specific place to go. So Dave, in his kindness, picked me up for a little while, and I worked in that area, and that actually gave me a place to take off from. It wasn't for me, the investigative private company, but I picked up contract teaching at the Canadian Police College. I was a lead facilitator for the executive development program, which kept me exposed to policing, which fed what I think I needed at the time because I really wasn't ready to leave policing. I picked up contracts with the FBI at the FBI Academy in Quantico, and I did a lot of work down there. And then I was doing contracting around the world, and a multinational corporation picked me up as a senior vice president, crisis communications, and the dollar signs were just spinning in my head. I worked that off and on for 3 years, but it wasn't for me. I kept getting criticized for giving away the information because it was all about problem solving. And I'd go into client meetings and I'd give them the answer in 5 minutes. And, the other people said, no, you could bill like 200 hours for that. What are you doing? My integrity wouldn't allow me just to be in the private industry anymore. One day I was just traveling around the world consulting governments, Europol, Interpol, all these other places, speaking at conferences. And I thought, what am I doing? What do I really want to do? Because the money was rolling in, but that wasn't making me happy. And then I realized I love teaching. And I had this education, this PhD. I'd always taught all the way through and just offered myself up. So I tried to get in the higher education sector. And boy, that was difficult. Everybody thought it was curious to have an ex-cop just step in the door and say, hey, I want to teach for you. And it took me a long time, and I got a low-level college professor teaching job to start off with. And that's like taking 10 steps back from where I was. But I thought, no, I'm going to start over. And it was like within a year, I was offered an executive position in a large university, and I ended up running the Justice Studies department. And I did that for about, 13 years. Totally fulfilled. Taking every gift that I was given through policing, through working with people like Dave and Quinton and others, and then being able to communicate that to the future generations, the satisfaction in that just filled my heart. And so that's why I left, and that's what I subsequently did. And but it took me a long time to get over it. I think that we'll get into that later. But anyway, that's why I left policing. Wasn't comfortable with it initially, but it was a good decision.
Yeah, leaving that camaraderie of the police department or really any first responder field military, it's really difficult, especially to find it afterwards. But it sounds like all of you have had very amazingly successful careers after law enforcement, and I'm going to need to draft you for my fantasy football team because I'm not loving my record right now. uh, so, Quentin, you founded Samson Shield. So, tell us a little bit about that and then how Dave and Gary play into that with you as well.
Well, yeah, like Dave, I did a stint in teaching with Guelph Humber University. I loved it while I was still on the job. It was one of those things that helped me transition into the private sector. Working with young adults and in criminal justice studies, and been doing a lot of mentorship through my last years in policing and business. Became pretty successful at real estate, but I just saw a gap in the service industry between the construction grade and the commercial grade of security guards to the high end condominiums that we have in Toronto. Toronto is, I think, number 2 or 3 in the world for volume of condominiums, by volume in any city. So um, I, I I had an opportunity to start Samson Shield and Risk Boss, and both at the same time, and I decided to change the paradigm in the concierge space, trying to make it more like a New York style Manhattan concierge. And boy, did it take off! It took off quickly. Um, Right now I have 150 employees, 16 years after I opened it, uh, 6 million in gross sales. I own the company alone, no one else. I have no debt. I bought a beautiful, large condominium office space right at the hub of Yonge and Bloor, which is our epicenter of the one of the highest areas for properties in Toronto. Bought it 6, 7 years ago. And I haven't taken a salary from Samson Shield or Risk Boss in 16 years because I did very well in the real estate and my police pension. So what I did was I created a children's foundation called the Samson Shield Foundation, and all money that would normally go to me as a salary, I give it to bursaries, higher wages, higher benefits for my employees, bursaries for the employees' children, and special needs and registered education plans for the children's future. So for me, it's not about the money. I mean, after 16 years, I'll be looking at selling the company in the next few years, and I'll get my payout then. But to live on operational cash flow, I didn't need it. So giving back to me was more important than anything else. One of the things I found early, and I think Gary and Dave will agree with me that, you know, when you're opening up a business, it's a very solitary affair. Everybody wants to be your partner. I don't have partners. And my recommendation is don't take on partners. If you need money, money is always there, but never take on business partners. Family and friends, they always want to be part of it. But unfortunately, we in business all know at the CEO level that family and friends can assist you. But, there's talented people out there that you should be paying as contractors that far exceed anyone that you know in your circle. And you should hire those people to make your businesses the best it can possibly be. I mean, yeah, David, for example, Dave hires ex-policemen, but we all know the policemen that are excel, the top performers, as it were, in investigative field. And Dave is known throughout Canada as the premier service provider for investigative services, right across Canada and in North America. So he knows that within your circle of influence, you only have a certain amount of people of those friends and that are top performers. And yet the rest are great guys and gals. But do you really want to bring in that whole environment full of police officers that maybe not as good as, say, from the RCMP or from the FBI and things like this with specific skill sets? My journey, I didn't have a lot of police. We brought on contractors to do risk assessments, but I didn't have a lot of police in the concierge space because frankly didn't pay enough. So my advice to anyone starting out: friends and family are great. Keep them out of your business. Employees versus contractors. Always go with the contractors instead of owning that risk as an employer. Employees employer relationship. Partners, just don't have them, period. And do it as early as you can, because as I think Gary said, when I was 50, I had a lot of runway left. But when you were 60, 65, it doesn't mean you can't open up a business. It just means that your best earning years are oftentimes between when you're 50 and 60. Not that you have any more energy than anybody else older, but you're more marketable. So in policing, I would leave one last recommendation is Gary, Dave, and I always moved around a lot. Every 2 or 3 years, we moved around a lot because every time you move, you learn more skill sets. And I moved from the operational field. I mean, I was in charge of the largest detective office in Canada, 31 Division. And boy, I got to tell you, I had 75 detectives working for me. And if you don't think they work hard, well, walk a mile in their shoes. And it's one of the toughest neighborhoods in Toronto. And my heart goes out to the officers at 31 Division and 31 CIB because they're the best of the best of the best. I'm sure every division will say that, but boy, these folks work really, really hard. So move a lot in policing. I went from the operations into planning and strategic planning and I did a stint 4 years in professional standards, and what they call internal affairs in United States. And you have to move around a lot, and sometimes your bosses recognize talent. And I remember the call that I got from a certain staff superintendent: "So you're coming to the internal affairs or professional standards?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "No, that wasn't a request. You're coming, and that's it." And I said, "How long do I have to stay?" And he said, 2 years. 4 years later, I left and I went to corporate planning. One of the best jobs I had, working for the chief staff, doing operational and strategic planning. It was amazing. Learned so much. You think you know it all as a street copper and as a detective and everything else, and then you go to see how a $1 billion a year operation runs with nearly 7,000 employees, and you're one of 13 people doing the planning for becoming a policy expert representing the police service on certain I sat on five corners, jury inquests, etc. Again, if you move around a lot, change your skill sets, it'll serve you better when you're ready to make that move to private practice.
Absolutely. Thank you. And on the subject of skill sets, Dave, what would you say would be the top three skills that you brought from law enforcement to the corporate world to become as
Mhm.
successful as you are?
That's a great question, but I can tell you they're not unique to me. Um, any police officer that spends the amount of time that we spent and retires walks away with tremendous skill sets. A really good example, one of the first consulting contracts I got was at a casino that had horse racing and car racing and all that kind of stuff. And they were having a real problem in there with theft and union issues and all of that kind of stuff. And somebody said to me, "Could you find me somebody who could write the policies and procedures for this place?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, policing, we're the most policy and procedured organization on the planet, and under a microscope by overseers and so on and so on. And all three of us wrote lots of policies and so on." So went ahead and did all of that kind of work. But every police officer leaves with a solid set of skills. They're problem solvers. They're people that can get things done. They're tenacious. They have, great minds in terms of coming up with different ideas on how you can take care of people's problems. And that's kind of what we all are in policing. We're fixers. We do emergency calls. We've got no time to prepare. You rely on your training, and you just take care of issues. And then if you can take all of that and transition it into the private sector, you can be successful in just about any place you want to go. Um, my last comment is that is listen. My advice is for police officers is to pick your path. Make your plan and go do something post policing that you think you're going to be happy in. Because most of us, not all of us, we're like any work organization. Most of us had an absolute ball working our careers. There's so many days I went to work and I said, "I can't believe they're paying me. I would come in and do this for free." That's how much fun we actually had. And then, of course, the calling, because it is a calling, policing, and the pride and the heartwarming moments that you have in helping people in their darkest hours is probably one of the most impactful things that you can experience. And if you can take all of that and then transition that into a corporate world, you can do that. So in policing, we were fortunate. We tried to work with the absolute best in policing, travel in those circles. And when I opened my company, Investigative Solutions Network, that was my main target. My main goal was to attract the right people from policing. And let's say that somebody came in and didn't quite make that threshold, then my goal was to take them and mentor them and help them and try and get them up to that next level corporately. And it is a big transition. It's a huge transition to go from policing to corporate, and it's scary. We're used to, for some people, 30, 35 years of routine camaraderie that is second to none. Just like any of the emergency services in the military, you get to love the people that you're working with. You get to save their lives, and they save your lives on a bad shift. And if you can carry that into the corporate world and just apply those same principles of duty and care, compassion, humanity, and kindness, then you're going to do fairly well.
That's really fantastic advice. And I appreciate you all dropping these nuggets of wisdom throughout everything that you're saying. Gary, can you talk about how your network that you built when you were a cop made it easier for you to leave and be successful afterwards?
Yes, I guess it's a double-edged sword in a sense, but when I left, somebody gave me some advice who'd been out of policing for a while and done very well. They said, "Your currency is only going to last a certain amount of time. So don't take time off, don't take a year off, don't travel. Get down, get into it, and start tapping your network for the work." And as I said right away, my first one was Dave. He hired me and he got me off the ground. Quinton was always in the background, and he's connected to me to so many things over the years. I got a problem. I call Quinton. I said, "Quinton, do you know a lawyer who?" And Quinton knows everybody. So the network was important, but it also took me to places in consulting because people knew me, I knew them, and just in passing, they would say, "Hey, are you," as Dave said, writing procedure. "Hey, do you know anything about this?" And boy, in policing, you know a lot about a lot of things. And if you don't know, you know how to find out. I was thinking about Dave there, and I'll turn to the teacher just for a second. What did you get out of policing? And I've spoken at this at conferences before and so on, but I put it into the C's. The first thing is caring. You learn to care. That's the thing, and not judge people just because they're stationed in life. Everybody's a human, and if you learn to care, that translates into everything you do, and people know you care about them. But if you care and you're dealing with a problem or an issue, you're going to research, you're going to be competent in dealing with the issue. So you just don't haphazardly make decisions. You do evidence based. You research. You do your stuff. You have to learn to communicate properly, and policing taught us that. To not just verbally, but in writing, to write reports and procedures. But you also have to know how to speak to people, and more importantly, listen to people. If you do those three things, you can start to have a little bit of courage to speak up because you have credibility. You automatically have credibility if you do those three things. Once you get credibility, people are willing to listen to you, so you can have courage. You can speak truth to power. You can implement change. You can challenge systems. And people will actually step back and listen to you. And they'll want to collaborate with you. That was the other point. And all of a sudden, all these skills that came out of policing sort of coalesce. And I know Quentin well, I know Dave well. All of these things, they're at a high level. And the last thing, and something I recognized early when I was dealing with superstars in policing, was you need to champion the people around you. So it's not about me. It starts with me. I got to take care of myself and do well, but you champion the people around you. You talk about the great work that they did. So this is the basics of what it is. But you asked me about the network. Your network, I think, is absolutely essential, but don't waste your time. There are people who want to retire as in policing, and they just want to retire. They want to do as little as possible. So what you want to do is stay friends, go to coffee, do whatever, but you want the people who are hungry to do something and make a change. I know that Dave and Quinton, they've talked about volunteerism. They make a change in people's lives. So you want to identify with people who are like-minded as you are. And that's what I did in my network. And I have networks, like I said, all over the world right now. People are calling me, "Hey, would you want to come and speak about this and that?" And right now I'm saying not as much. But it is absolutely essential to know who you can call on and who can call on you, and the trust. The underlying thing is trust. In policing, they use the term, "Hey, they're solid." And you want to build a network of solid people that you know that they're solid. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. That's everything you said just rings so true. So I appreciate it. So in these last couple of minutes, I'm just going to kind of open it up to all of you. We have the reason Cop to Corporate exists is because we have a lot of people who are considering leaving law enforcement or who have left law enforcement that may be just confused about what to do, don't know what their passion is outside of law enforcement, who, I mean, maybe they're just dipping their toe in and considering it, or they're full on done and they don't they don't think that they have a future outside of law enforcement. So, what would be the final advice that you all would give to cops that are in these places and that might help them after watching this?
I guess I could start off. Police officers have a popularity rating far, 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 far above politicians. We have an 80 to 90% approval rating, depending on what city or what regional jurisdiction. We're just under doctors, but we're far above politicians and people underneath us. Oftentimes, we don't get the thanks that we deserve, particularly from some of the media outlets. But police officers all know, seasoned police officers all know throughout North America and the world that they are appreciated. We don't need a politician to get up on a podium and spout off some talking points about how much they care about policing and all that stuff. We know that the general population cares about us and all the other emergency service workers and caregivers around the world. So my last advice is to stand tall, be with your friends, support them when you can. Gary Ellis and I sat on a very important committee years and years and years ago. It was the first of its kind in North America. We created the first employee family assistance program, a substance abuse program, critical incident debriefing program in North America. And after we created it with our committee, and it was approved by the board and the chief and the police association, we had other police services running to us saying, how can we emulate that? And this was breaking. It took 2 years to create. So support your fellow officers. And there's mechanisms now that weren't around when we first joined the job. I'm going to quote an absolute legend in the law world in Canada, Ed Greenspan. He told a very good friend of mine that opened up a company who was an investigator. He says, look, don't deal with three kinds of people in business. Don't deal with cheap, don't deal with bully, and don't deal with stupid. Because if you deal with cheap, bullying, and stupid, they have a lot of cheap, bullying, and stupid friends, and you're going to have a whole book of clients that way. He says, refer them to someone you don't like and keep them busy with those kinds of people. Pretty sage advice from a very big legend in the industry who was very successful. I'll leave you with two other things. Where organizations exist that are police organizations, they're very, very helpful. You see them, international organizations. Try joining organizations that are not police related, like the Toronto Board of Trade. Every city has a Board of Trade. Join it, right? I created my own industry group called Penethic because I interviewed about 20 CEOs, about 13, 14. I asked them to join this group. We meet twice a year for a full day talking about industry issues for the condominium industry, security. One thing we never talk about is pricing because it's against the Competition Act. But the only criteria that I demanded for people to join is be ethical. We don't have a charter. We don't have a website. We don't have any policies and procedures. We meet and we talk about how we can help each other. Lastly, write articles. I've been writing articles for 20 years in the condominium space and known as an industry, subject matter expert in condominium security and risk mitigation. And albeit the magazine publications were good and the editors are fabulous, they would limit me to a page. So what can you talk about on a page, right? Not too much. So what I did is I created my own magazine. I said, to hell with it. And I created Risk Boss Magazine. And over the past 9 years, with great, articles from people like Dave and Gary Ellis and others, we're in 30,000 households now in the GTA electronically. And It is the premier magazine for organizational and community risk. So do it yourself. Be a trailblazer. I started out with a very small magazine, and I started out with one building as a client. And, like Dave and in his own right, Gary, it takes time to develop that capacity to perform at the highest levels in the industry. Look at what other companies are doing and, learn from them and do better. So I hope that this has been helpful to everybody who has been listening. And I want to thank Cop to Corporate for everything you do each and every day to make police officers' lives better inside and outside of the organization, because what you're doing is significant and has a meaningful impact on people's lives in this industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Quinton. Thank you. Brian and I both have, the experience of leaving law enforcement and figuring out what was next. So this is close to both of our hearts. So I appreciate it. Dave, do you have any last advice for everybody?
Differing on what anybody else has said, but I think the three of us would all say this. You don't have to be us. You don't have to open your own company. You don't have to have all those headaches and all that risk unless it's in your heart, unless you're passionate about doing that. So I find that with the hundreds of police officers that have walked through my doors over the years, the majority of them don't want that, but they want to be some part of a really good organization. And that's what I think all of us should leave policing with, that plan, as I said earlier, and just pick where you're going to be happy and passionate and can use some of your skills that you gathered. I don't know how many police officers walked into me and said, Dave, I'd like to work for you. And I go, sure. What would you like to do? Well, I don't know. I don't really bring much to the table. And I always laugh. And I sit down. I said, do you happen to have a resume? Most of them don't. I mean, it's getting better today, but I say, well, let's sit with one of my staff. Let's spend an hour and let's put a resume together for you. And that's sort of a fulfilling exercise for them, as they all of a sudden write down all the skill sets. And then we start doing the cross-referencing and where we can apply those skill sets in our business or some other business. So be proud of who you are, recognize what you've achieved and what you've developed in terms of skills over your policing career, and then find a place to have fun and apply those skills. And then hopefully you'll still be like us. We're still engaged with each other, colleagues from policing. And there's not a day goes by in my business I'm not talking to police officers. That's where I loved to be when I was a police officer. It's where I still love to be today. So if you can find that kind of a passion and happiness in your post-policing career, hopefully you'll be as happy as we all are.
Thank you, Dave. Fun is really important. And Gary, you want to land the plane with some of your last advice?
Well, be careful. If I'm landing the plane, we could be in trouble. We've already talked about building out, nurturing your networks, but that goes along with find your passion outside of policing, or if it's connected to policing, like Dave, Quinton, it's connected to security and justice, but not so much policing. Mine, it's just across the map, eclectic. And one thing that I learned, and it was a hard lesson for me, was I was giving out my resume for policing. And where you may be considered a superstar in policing, the rest of the world, you're a curiosity and they don't understand. And so I had this resume that people said, you got to cut it down. I said, well, I did this. I was there. I was there. And, what do I cut out? And my final lesson came, someone recommended me for a very, very high position in a very big corporation. I applied. I got invited to New York City to meet with the big president of the company or whatever he was. I think he was higher than president. And they put me up, treated me like royalty. And I went into the office and sat down, and he said, I just had to meet the guy who had that resume. Oh my goodness, what you've done here and what you've done there. He says, you could write books. I said, okay. He said, I just want to tell you, you're not getting the job. I want to hire a corporate lawyer who has this experience. I just wanted to meet you. I wanted to smack him in the back of the head and walk out. But at the same time, the lesson to me was my fault. Your resume, if you're going to be going into something, policing is something you did that most of the world can never, ever understand what it is and how hard you had to work at it and what you had to learn. You're a curiosity to them. My resume now is maybe, 4 pages, 3 lines involve policing. The rest is other things I've done. So the advice Quinton and Dave gave you about volunteerism, getting involved with different boards and committees and all these other things will help you initially build your resume when you step out of policing. Policing is still important, but the world isn't going to see it the same way people who are in policing see it. And even when I was working in the corporate world in a senior position, I know I was the curiosity in the room. You know, they'd love to get me to telling stories. And as Dave and Quinton know, I hate telling stories, right, guys? Get me telling stories and the meetings go on forever. And people love that. So, but that's not what's going to make you successful. So that's what I would suggest, that you build your resume, appreciate the policing, but at the same time, don't count on it. And the other thing is, before you step out, secure your financial base. Make a plan. I talked about this earlier about commuting, pensions, and so on and so forth. Some people just go and they go emotionally, they go bitter, and then they say, I'm going to do something else. If you can, plan 5 years ahead of time. What is my interest? What do I need to do? What courses do I need to take? Do I need to do small engine repair, or do I need to do something else? Whatever it might be, build it out so when it's time to go, you can say to your pension, I'm going to reinvest you and let it grow, because most people leave policing young. And your finances have to last you a lifetime. So try not to use your pension. That's a little bit of advice I have. And reinvest your pension and live off of what you earn. And I guess I'll leave it at that. There's more, but we're limited by time. So thank you. Really appreciate you being part of this. And good luck to anybody who wants to step out. There is a life after policing, but never, ever diminish your experience in policing, because you're only diminishing yourself. It's been part of you. So thank you.
Amen. Quinton, Dave, Gary, I so appreciate you for coming on to Cop to Corporate. I hope that everybody watching is leaving as inspired and fulfilled as I am. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for being here.
This video was recorded and produced by Just Talk Studios, the premier video podcasting studio in Bellevue, Washington. Visit justtalkstudios.com to learn more and book your session today.